One fill isn't enough. We need two. And he's back this weekend at the Ohio Derby. Let's preview the big race at Thistledown.
Today's video is brought to you by Assiniboia Downs Gaming and Event Center. And be sure to tune in to Trust the Profits Live Mondays at 8 p.m. Eastern for Monday Night Lights, hosted by Matthew DeSantis.
Salutations and welcome, friends. I'm your host of this graded stakes preview. My name is Matthew DeSantis. You can find me on Twitter at the handle at Fail to Menace. Well, we are getting ready to preview the Grade 3 Ohio Derby, which is coming up this weekend. We're getting all these post Triple Crown races coming up now, and this is really exciting. The Ohio Derby kicking off this Midwestern Derby triumvirate of the Indiana Derby, the West Virginia Derby, a lot of great racing coming across the Midwest, and also coincides with the great Haskell coming up here next month in July, and then obviously all the wonderful races up in Saratoga this summer. Now, before we get into the Ohio Derby, just a quick reminder to press that subscribe button here on YouTube to get all of our content. Listen, we have live betting shows on Monday and Thursday nights. Monday nights, of course, at Assiniboia Downs. We always love doing that. Thursdays at Woodbine. That's the one El Hombre is in charge of the Cocktail Lounge. We got all sorts of great content in between, though. We got some Royal Ascot previews that are out that you can take a look at. We got Doubling Down with Colin Sheehan. We got some new people coming onto the network. Jessica Tugwell, of course, with the Pedigree Puzzle, full field rundowns, etc. So we got something for every type of horse racing fan. Press that subscribe button. Additionally, press the like button in this video and let us know who's your top pick in this coming Saturday's Ohio Derby. Well, let's dive into this race. And this came up as a very, I think, intriguing race. There are some interesting horses in here and some familiar names. I actually think this came up as a pretty nice field for what we see in this Grade 3 Ohio Derby, going a mile and an eighth, of course. This is up at Thistledown. And an 8-horse field. You have Henry Q in the number one hole for Doug O'Neill at 5-1. This is a horse that's coming back from the Peter Pan. We remember this horse, of course, perhaps from the Mind That Bird Derby, as well as the Sunland Park Derby out there in New Mexico. Those are the two races where this horse really kind of made a little bit of an impression, particularly the Mind That Bird Derby, winning that race by 14 3/4 lengths that day over Garuvan and the late Wild on Ice, who, of course, came back to win the Sunland Park Derby. And then you have the number 2 horse, Real Big Long Shot, Times the Tapin, 30-1 on the morning line. You know, we'll talk a little bit more about this horse, but that's one that I think is going to be really up against it in this particular race. Only has one career victory in a maiden at Mahoning Valley, and this could be a really tough test for this horse, whose best career speed figure is really nowhere close to what it would need to be a contender in this race. Then you have the number 3, Bishop's Bay, Brad Cox horse, Florent Giroux aboard. This is a horse that I think has had his form flattered quite a bit. It's a horse that, of course, out-dueled another Brad Cox runner, First Mission, who was one of the top choices in the Preakness before he scratched, and that's a horse that's actually now gone to the bench for a little while, and then comes back, wins another race next time out in a high-level allowance race over Demolition Duke and First Defender, and then comes back and has that thrilling stretch run and just barely loses to Arcangelo in the Grade 3 Peter Pan. Of course, Arcangelo comes back to win the Belmont in the next start. So certainly Bishop's Bay has the form flattered a little bit by losing to the eventual Belmont Stakes winner. Then you have the morning line favorite, 2 Fills. This is the horse that is very near and dear to my heart. If you've been listening to me and Colin Sheehan talk about this horse, we were very high on this horse throughout the Derby trail. I went back and watched some of our old videos. He and I were on this horse going back to the Lecomte Stakes as a horse we really liked, and just was really honest, had a lot of versatility, could go to the lead, could sit in mid-pack, and it just felt like this horse finally kind of got into his groove. He went on the synthetic at Turfway Park, ran a huge race in the Jeff Ruby Stakes, winning that one easily over Major Duden, fantastic again, and then comes back and runs just an absolute banger of a race in the Kentucky Derby, being right up on that lead, being on the lead, and being able to sustain those fractions and hang on so gamely for second place that day, holding off Angel of Empire, just losing to Mage, recording the best speed figure in the field by far that day in that race. Obviously, this is a horse that has, now taken a little bit of time off. I think understandably so. That was a taxing race. Larry Ravelli, the trainer, wants to give this horse a little bit of time off. Jareth Loveberry aboard has been riding him for almost 8 of his 9 career races. and for all of his victories. But this is a horse that looks like he's feeling good again. You start looking at the workout pattern, and this horse is firing off 5 furlong bullets again at Hawthorne. May 28th, 59 and 4, 5 furlong work. June 8th, 59 flat, 5 furlong work. Comes back with a little bit of a maintenance work last week of 51 and 4, 4 furlong, nice easy work. Kind of the Steve Asmussen approach, right? Of let's get him bullets and then let's have a nice easy work right before the race. So, Two Phil seems to be in very good shape, a very tough and formidable horse in this spot, but one that is, I think, a fan favorite and a horse that really, you look going back to, honestly, outside of the debut effort and the Breeders' Futurity, where he had legitimate issues in that race. This horse just runs honest. I mean, just runs super, super honest. So, really nice horse that I can't say enough about. Then you have the number 5 and Agnello's Dream, 20-1 for Jeffrey Scarrett. And this is another one's going to have to make a huge step up. I mean, this is a really big long shot. This horse that admittedly has run some nice races recently, has hit the board the last 4 times out, but has also been well beaten in some of those races, particularly going 2 turns. When he went 1.70 miles, he was beaten by 10 and a quarter lengths. Not exactly what you want to see there. He's actually been a little bit more effective sprinting. He's a horse, though, that does not necessarily have blistering sprinter speed. He's not a horse that when you see him at 6 furlongs is always up on the lead. He usually is forwardly placed, but last time out at 5.5 furlongs, he was sitting actually towards the back of the pack. So, again, a little bit of an interesting dimension there. Could inject a little bit of speed into this race. Last cookie, the number 6 for Joanna Urita, and with Leandro Briseno aboard. This is another horse going to have to take a step forward. Has been progressing, third back in the form cycle. The last speed figure was his best, and certainly this horse's only win though was a $15,000 maiden claimer on the synthetic at Turfway Park. So we'll be up against it in this spot, I think, for sure, and rightfully 30-1. Then you have some interesting horses on the outside. You obviously have Lord Miles for Safi Joseph Jr. Edgar Zaya is up. This is a horse, of course, that won the Wood Memorial. That was then scratched and taken out of the Kentucky Derby. There was a lot of focus because of everything that happened with Safi in the week leading up to the Kentucky Derby, with 2 of his horses dying after the races were run of apparent heart attacks and catastrophic heart failure. So Churchill suspends Safi from the premises, suspends him from all of their tracks across the country. And as a result, Lord Miles does not get an opportunity to run in the Kentucky Derby, the race that he had qualified for by winning the Wood Memorial. And this is a horse that prior to that was on the come up. I mean, you legitimately could see, well, listen, he ran a 64 buyer in the Holy Bull, a 79 buyer in the Tampa Bay Derby, a 93 in the Wood Memorial. He was getting faster and faster each time out. And maybe you could make an argument he was moving in the right direction, but now he's been off since April 8th. That's been a little bit of time. This horse has been off, obviously. So we missed May. We're through most of June. So now we're looking at a 10-12 week, 10-11 week layoff, and 7-2 on the morning line. Certainly, it gets a lot of respect as the very close third choice in this race. But I think legitimate questions about how's this horse going to come back? And honestly, the Wood Memorial is the best race of this horse's career. Is this horse able to replicate that race again? We'll see. And then on the far outside, you have Hayes Strike at 6-1 for Ken McPeak with Christian Torres aboard. This is a horse that was really outclassed at the Bluegrass 2 back, but came back and ran a really nice race in the Texas Derby at Lone Star. And, he's beaten some horses that are halfway decent. He's beaten a horse like Harlow Cap and Eyeing Clover and Coffee with Chris. And he's beat some nice enough horses actually throughout his career. He's a little bit of a hard-knocking type of a horse. He finished 3rd in the Kentucky Jockey Club to Instant Coffee and Curly Jack. He finished 2nd in the Street Sense to 2 Phils. I mean, he's run up against decent competition and run pretty well, 6-1 on the morning line. I think kind of an interesting horse to potentially take a look at here. And we'll talk a little bit more about. But, that's your field for the Ohio Derby. And again, I think 2 Phils does obviously stand out. Now, listen, the big question here, and this just comes to what type of player you are to some extent and how you want to approach this particular race, but it really is going to come down to, do you embrace 2 Phils or do you play against? And I think this gets into a little bit of the pace scenario and a little bit of the speed figures, but obviously Two Phils is coming off a Herculean effort in that Kentucky Derby, being right up on the pace and finishing as well as he did. I know a lot of people will say, well, bounce doesn't happen after 5 weeks. Once a horse has 5 weeks off, you don't have to worry about a bounce anymore. I don't know if I completely believe that. I've seen plenty of horses that have had the starch taken out of them because of a really big race, and they're not quite the same after that. I don't know if we'll see that with Two Phils. We've seen mixed results coming back from the Derby. Honestly, we've seen a horse like Mage obviously come back, finish third in the Preakness just 2 weeks later. I think that you have to kind of deal with in its own right, because coming back on such short rest is always a challenge, no matter who the horse is. And then you've seen a horse like Verifying and Kingsbarns, both of whom were up on that pace, who faded badly that day, come back and run seconds in their respective races. Verifying at the Grade 3 Matt Win, and the Kingsbarns this past week in the Pegasus Stakes at Monmouth. Now, one of the things I'll say about that race in the Matt Win, the winner was Disarm. Disarm, of course, was the horse that finished fourth in the Kentucky Derby. So, it's interesting to see how the Derbies come back, how horses have come out of the Derby. I think that's always a big question, is how horses come out, how much does that race take out of certain horses, etc. So obviously we saw Angel of Empire, Hit Show, Tapit Trice coming back from the Derby, running in the Belmont, running fine, but third, dead heat for fourth between Angel of Empire and Hit Show. So like I said, it's interesting to see how that Derby form has kind of turned back. So either you go, listen, Two Phils is this new type of horse. He ran a 101 speed figure at Turfway Park. He ran a 105 at Churchill Downs in the Derby. He is now just a triple digit speed figure type of horse. And maybe he is one of the more dominant horses that we have now in our 3-year-old class. Or you're going to say, I think that race is going to take something out of him, and I'm going to play against him in this spot. So that's kind of the way I think you need to approach the Ohio Derby. And if you're trying to play against him, where do you go in this particular case? Well, let's talk a little bit about the running styles and the pace setup in this race. And I think it's an interesting one, because I mentioned, there are a couple of horses that are, sprint horses. Agnello's Dream stretching out, has stretched out before and hasn't really been on the lead when it stretched out before and faded badly that time. So I have that horse more down as a stalker. I would imagine, based upon these early time form pace figures and late time form pace figures, the way you're going to see this race play out is Bishop's Bay is going to go right to the lead. And then you're going to see a horse like Two Phils and Henry Q sitting right off of this horse, in all likelihood, stalking that sort of trip. I think Agnello's Dream might try to give it a go there initially, but obviously you can see the late time form pace. That horse does not have the stamina to this point to demonstrate that it's going to be able to get the job done going 2 turns at this caliber. Then you look at a couple of horses. You look at a horse like Lord Miles, has a versatile running line. He's been a dead closer in some races because he's gotten off to a bad start and he's had the inside rail. He's also sat mid-pack before. He sat a little bit forward in some races as well. So he's a versatile horse in terms of Lord Miles. So we'll see what we end up getting there. Hayes Strike is really kind of a dead closer, as is Times a Tappin'. Hayes Strike has got the best late pace speed figure in the field, but you'll notice what really stands out is the Two Phils figures, that his early and late time form pace figures are identical, which is rare to see with any horse, no matter what the number is. And then to see them both being triple digit early and late pace speed figures, it's just super impressive. And so you would imagine that in this sort of a race, Bishop's Bay will probably be able to go to the lead and set what I would imagine are going to be reasonable fractions in this race. Henry Q is not the type of horse that's going to necessarily force the pace. Granted, this is a horse that did get up on the lead and wire the field in the Mind That Bird. Maybe you think this is a horse that is going to absolutely gun it from the inside rail. That's certainly a possibility. But if you go back and look at that Peter Pan, he was a horse that was stalking that trip and then faded going a little bit longer against, I think, a higher caliber of competition than what he had been running against at Sunland Park. So again, this is a horse that, his win was in a maiden optional claimer at Santa Anita, and then he goes and wins the Mind That Bird. Then he runs a third in the Sunland Park Derby, and that was a really good third because they were flying up there on the front end in that race. They were going really, really fast that day. And for him to hold on and run as well as he did, I thought was impressive, even if the speed figure didn't come back huge. The Peter Pan figure was fine in 83. He's going to have to take a huge step forward. So I think the big question is, does Kendrick just gun it from the inside rail? This horse has been working out nicely, has shifted barns but actually was in Doug O'Neill's barn initially, then went to Todd Fincher, now back with Doug O'Neill, and ran a 59-4, 5 furlong work on June 18th. So this is a horse that's clearly feeling pretty good, having come out of that grade 3 Peter Pan. But I think, that's the question. Does Henry Q gun it and really challenge Bishop's Bay to run? Bishop's Bay has demonstrated the ability. He doesn't mind sitting second. He doesn't need the lead, but he does have the best, like I said, early speed in the race. So it's going to be an interesting play out. I think the key, though, is that I would imagine Two Phils, no matter who ends up going to the lead, whether it's Bishop's Bay, Henry Q, or both, Two Phils is going to be sitting right off of that pace. And he's going to be glued either off the flank of the lone leader, or he's going to be sitting, I'd imagine, a pocket trip behind Henry Q and Bishop's Bay, going around most of the way around. And then he's just got superior late speed. So I would imagine that when he's pressed, he's just going to, when Jareth decides to press the button on him, he's going to explode and really be able to go away well. He's going to be my top pick in this race. I mean, I'm not going to, try to make any, fanciness out of this one. But this is one that I think, it's hard to get around Two Phils in this spot. But like I said, from a race dynamic, he's going to be up close. Lord Miles, versatile horse. And then Hayes Strike is going to be your dead closer, who I think has maybe a shot. If Henry Q really pushes the pace with Bishop's Bay, then I think Hayes Strike has got a shot in this race. And I expect him to run up and get a piece of this race. So just putting some of the perspective in terms of buyer speed figures. And listen, I know some of you don't care much about speed figures at all, and some of you are absolutely beholden to speed figures, and I'm usually somewhere in between. You look at how the horse just generally runs, and then sometimes speed figures can be helpful in terms of letting just comparing one horse to another, different circuits, etc. So in this year's Ohio Derby, you look at the speed figures, and again, Two Phils has the best speed figure. That was his last time out as well, that 105 in the Kentucky Derby. He also would have the second best speed figure in the entire group, the 101 that he ran in the Jeff Ruby Stakes at Turfway Park. So not only the best, but the second best speed figure in both instances, and those were his last two efforts. You look at the others, obviously Bishop's Bay, very close with a 97. Henry Q has a good race in him. That Mind That Bird was that 93, most recently ran an 83. Here's where you really see the big gap between, I know there's a few of you on the chat who are going to probably say, oh, let's go for a bomb, Time's a Tappin', or Agnello's Dream, or Last Cookie. They're going to be able to do it. You're going to have to see a monumental increase in speed figures for these horses. Not saying it's not possible, but it is going to take a huge effort. And there's not a lot to suggest that they're sitting on that huge effort. It's not like, okay, this is a horse that's, second back from a long layoff, or third back in a form cycle, maybe, or that has really shown, this horse just has had a lot of trouble, and this going to be its opportunity to break out. I mean, those three in particular really have not even won that much. So I think it's hard to put a lot of confidence that they're all of a sudden going to step up and run effectively in this race. Now, Lord Miles is an interesting horse because he's very similar to Two Phils in that he's got the same, he's got a nice recent speed figure in terms of a 93 as his best, and his most recent is just that came 11 weeks ago in the Wood Memorial. How does he fire off the layoff? Listen, Safi is 21% off the layoff, but we also talk about Safi a lot as he's not quite the same outside of Florida. And we'll see how he ends up running here in the Ohio Derby. Lord Miles at 7-2 in the morning line. I don't know if I love that. I mean, Hayes Strike is probably a horse that's a little bit more interesting to me at a little bit more of a price. Or even Henry Q, if you think that Henry Q might be able to wire the field. But again, going back to that previous slide of the pace figures, I don't know if Henry Q is going to be able to wire the field with the Bishop's Bay being involved in the early speed. Well, listen, that's a little bit of an overview of this week's Ohio Derby. And one of the things that Colin, when he joins me, he always likes to do is talk about top Vic and top value play in this particular race. So even though he's not here, I'm going to use the graphic that he always puts up there. And listen, my top pick, I'm not going to get fancy, is Two Phils. This is a horse I was absolutely high on. All the other guys on the channel were making fun of me about it. I freaking love Two Phils going into that Kentucky Derby, and he ran his heart out, and I absolutely love him for it. That huge second place effort that day. I love what Ravelli did. I love Ravelli basically said, listen, that was a huge race for this horse. He came out fun, but it was a huge race. We're going to give this horse a little bit of time. We're going to point this horse towards one of the Midwestern Derbies. Then we're probably going to go up to Saratoga. There's a clear plan. Ravelli had a clear plan coming out of that Kentucky Derby, what he wanted to do with this horse. And I think this is a great landing spot for him. I think it's a great pace setup for him. I think he's going to sit right behind Henry Q and Bishop's Bay and then go. Bishop's Bay, one of the things I'll say is that horse put a head in front of Arcangelo and then let up in that Peter Pan. And Richie Migliori talked a lot about that in great detail. And that was really interesting to hear him talk about that right after that race took place. And he said, Bishop's Bay, he got to the lead, and all of a sudden the ears started looking around. He started looking around for where's my friends? Where are my other horses? He didn't want to necessarily. And you notice this, even in the races that he's won, it's been really close all the time. And he's gone off his huge favorites. So he's not a horse that wins convincingly, and he's a horse that may actually hang a little bit when he's against better competition. So for those reasons, I'm just not going to use Bishop's Bay. I'm not going to use that horse at 3-1. I'm not entirely sold on Lord Miles at 7-2 at that price. I don't really like it coming off the long layoff. And with all the drama that surrounded that horse, not the horse's fault at all, but just one of those things to consider in terms of his patterns being disrupted and things like that. Then you look at Henry Q, and I think, the other one to really look at is Hayes Strike. And so that's my value play is Hayes Strike at 6-1. I think that's a horse that might just get a nice trip. I think if Henry Q really goes at Bishop's Bay up front, it might open up fractions for a horse to come running late. Maybe you think, Two Fills is going to wear out a little bit after that really strenuous Kentucky Derby. So if you're looking for a horse coming from the back, certainly Hayes Strike fits the bill. 6-1, you're getting a little bit more of an honest price. The concern that I have with Hayes Strike is the on-off Lasix dynamic. That you look at the race that he won at Laurel, the race he won at Lone Star with Lasix. Ken McPeak is one of the worst trainers in the game in terms of his splits on-off Lasix. And so that is something just to keep in mind. The numbers, as last time I looked, he was 1 for 26 going off of Lasix in graded stakes races. That's not the sort of statistic you want to see. Now, I mentioned this horse ran well off Lasix in a couple of other races. Ran, like I said, a competitive second in the street sense. Ran a very competitive third in the Kentucky Jockey Club. So this horse has good races in him off Lasix. But those last 2 wins came with Lasix. And McPeak is a trainer who, again, it is very hit or miss when you start talking about that. So there's a little bit of a mystery with Hayes Strike in that regard, but that's also why you're getting a little bit of value. All right. Well, that's going to do it for me this week. Appreciate everybody tuning into the Ohio Derby preview. I'm going to have a preview of all 4 of the stakes races at Thistledown on Saturday. I'm going to have a very special guest to join me. That video is going to drop on Friday at some point. That's going to basically be your late pick 4 video. So make sure to check that out. That's going to be a lot of fun. We got a lot of other great content. So make sure to like and subscribe. Until next time, friends, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and profitable day at the races and reminding you that it's now post time.